Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world, and welcome back to the Rebel Reject Create podcast. And my guest today is Dr. Michael Bloomfield, a cognitive anthropologist and the founder of the Kermanu Creativity System. I hope I pronounced that right.
You didn't, but it's okay. No, it's one of those things I've got to educate people about. It's fine.
Yeah, I'm kind of like going all island style, Kermanu. I'm thinking
Yeah.
Kermanu Samoa and those kind of
It's
things.
It's Kermanu, so it's very
Kermanu.
close. Yeah.
Okay, less syllables. Now, Michael, your whole work and life is about creativity in one way or another, and you've clearly dedicated an enormous amount of time and energy getting to know a huge bunch about it. Why? Why is it so important?
This is the key question. Why? It's Simon Sinek's why, yes. I mean, really, I go back to the start, which was as a teenager, I think, I've done a lot of reflection about this kind of thing. I suppose I felt alienated, I felt sort of confused and so on. And the one thing that I found myself wanted to do and doing was being creative. So I started making music when I was 15 or 16.
Hmm.
Um, I didn't just want to make music like, do covers and whatever. For some reason, I had the sense of I want to create genius works.
Right.
I want to change music. I mean, it's a kind of, I suppose it comes from a sense of, inadequacy in some sense. I've got to do something remarkable, right?
Yeah.
But anyway, whatever it was, I also really admired, I really got into certain kind of, avant-garde rock, like Sonic Youth and this kind of thing. So the very, very kind of edgy, artistic, rather than the mainstream stuff, So it was like a lot of teenagers. You don't want to be mainstream. You want to be kind of edgy and cool, right? So I spent 2 or 3 years really obsessing about being creative. I wasn't that interested in creativity as a thing in itself, which is common for many creative people. You
Yes.
just want to do in the field you're working in, you just obsess about that. And I spent, I was in a band for 3 years or so, and I mean, I won't denigrate it because I think I came up with some amazing songs. But there's one thing being creative and making songs. There's another thing like going out and performing and touring and this kind of thing. And we played a few gigs, and I'm like, you know what? I actually don't enjoy this. What I really enjoy is writing the music. A little bit like the Beatles, if I can compare myself to them. I just wanted to stay in the studio and write music, which I
Right.
did, and I continue to do that to this day. But really, that's where my passion for creativity came in. But at some point, you have to start doing something with your young life. And what I did is I discovered anthropology.
Mm.
So anthropology, it's not even something that still most people really know what it is, and I certainly hadn't because, let's face it, at school and
Mm.
even at A level in this country, you can't study anthropology. I mean, maybe it's changed these days, but you can study history and psychology and geography, but anthropology is not a subject that people
Yeah.
understand. So even now I say I do anthropology and people are like, is that like archaeology? I'm like, yes, some of, but it's. So I discovered anthropology through an evening class and that became a huge passion of mine. And really, it's all about learning how other people live. I mean, that's the bottom
Right.
line. It's like rather than saying how, what are the forces that drive modern society and stuff. This is more about a more universal look at humanity. So you start learning about the very different customs and rituals and mythologies of different cultures, and not just different civilizations like maybe Greece or Egypt, but hunter-gatherer societies,
Right.
indigenous societies all over the world. And it's so exciting because you learn very different ways of thinking and being, and things that you take for granted, that we
Right.
do, you realize are actually peculiar to our own society. And in a sense, we're the weird ones.
Mhm.
If you look at the way that family is structured, for example, we think this is sort of natural to have a monogamous nuclear family. Well, it's really bizarre, to be frank, because in traditional societies, families tend to be much more extended, for example. That's one thing. So I discovered anthropology. I went to university and studied it, and I, fell in love with it. But at the same time, I never lost my passion for creativity. And I started realizing throughout my studies that really anthropology and creativity are beautiful bedfellows because it's all about interrogating your assumptions.
Right.
Um, and about what we do take for granted and what can be, overturned. And that's the basis of creativity, as you will well know.
Right.
Um, I then got the opportunity to do a PhD straight after my first degree, which was a wonderful thing. And it's like, as with all PhDs, it's like, what do you want to study? And I suddenly thought, well, I can study creativity through the lens of anthropology. So I
Anthropology.
spent 5 years analyzing and researching, looking into the evolutionary origins of creativity. So how and why did
Wow.
we become creative in the first place? And that
Yeah.
involved looking at cave art and the evolving brain
All
and
right.
how grammatical language emerged, this kind of thing.
Right. Because I'm
Um,
beginning to think that actually human beings are creative before they're intelligent. So I'd be very interested as someone who's actually studied stuff like this.
yeah.
Would you even begin to agree with that?
It's a complicated issue. Certainly, intelligence correlates very weakly with creativity. So, being more intelligent can have a marginal benefit for creativity, but they're certainly not one and the same thing. And in fact, you'll probably know that a lot of intelligence and knowledge can undermine creativity because it sets up the kind of assumptions we're talking about. There's lots of research showing that knowledge of a domain, while necessary for being creative within that domain, actually can inhibit or
Yeah.
constrain your thinking within that domain. So creativity, in a sense, requires you to be stupid at times, to ask those stupid questions, to throw out what you think you know. So they're certainly not one and the same thing. And but for me, I would argue that creativity sits above intelligence. That really being intelligent, for example, when you do anthropology, as I did, you study a lot about primate cognition, and you learn that chimpanzees and gorillas are incredibly intelligent. They probably have theory of mind. They understand that other individuals have a different mind than their own. They can deceive, they can scheme, they can form alliances, they can do all sorts of very intelligent things. And they've been tested and they've been shown they can even symbolically communicate this kind of thing. But they can't really be creative. And being creative does require an extra leap of not just, let's say, intelligence, but something more, something special. And there
Right.
are different actually schools of thought within creativity science, which is something that I learned many years ago. Is creativity fundamentally special? Is it different to other forms of cognition? Or is it just that, well, you know more about a subject, you're very intelligent, and you're therefore more likely to be creative within that subject? I tend to favor the former view, which is that there's something special about creativity. There's something magical about creativity almost, which is separate from knowledge of something and
Right.
intelligence more generally. Yeah,
It's a bit of a paradox, isn't it? Because in order to be creative, you need a lot of dots, a lot of
yeah,
information.
you do.
But if you're too schooled, you won't reorganize them into different configurations because you'll just go
Absolutely.
with the party line, as it were. But if you don't know enough, then you don't have enough dots to join. So
Absolutely right. Yeah. I
yeah,
think for me, what I've done over the years is to form a picture of what's important in terms of the creative person.
right.
Um, and one of the key things as your bedrock, you do need to have knowledge, yes. But you then need to have a couple of other attributes and sort of facets to your personality that go beyond that knowledge. And these are embodied in the kind of archetypes I can talk about with my set of cards, which I've developed recently. You need to channel different kinds of archetypes. Yes, I mean, let's look at someone like Einstein. Einstein played the violin, but he wasn't really creative within violin playing. He didn't have the incredible depth of knowledge and expertise within violin playing that he had in physics. He needed the intense knowledge, the incredible knowledge within physics to be supremely creative within physics. So to be creative within the domain, you don't need maximum knowledge of that domain, but you do need a certain minimum amount, let's say, in order for you to release your ability to be creative within that field, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, Einstein's an interesting example, isn't he? Because with all that knowledge, he was also notoriously bad at the math,
Yeah.
you know? So,
Yeah.
like
Yeah. I
the
mean,
sort of skill set you would expect, he just didn't really, well, I mean, I'm sure he was better at math than I am, for example,
yes.
but
Yeah, and he's a good example of someone who whose creative mind was special really because of his thought experiments basically were just him sitting down thinking just imagining stuff in an incredibly sophisticated way without doing the proper research, without really having almost hunches, if you like, and just
yeah,
figuring things out. And 100 years later, we keep finding out that he was right about this, he was right about that. Okay, he's wrong about a few things, but
yeah,
he had something special, whatever it was about Einstein. It's not just that he had the most knowledge within the domain of physics. No, he had some other kind of imagination. And, I'm sure it's this quote that you've probably used before. He said, imagination is more important than knowledge. That's what
yeah.
he himself
He
said.
actually said it. Yeah.
Yeah.
I want to tie this into what you were saying right at the beginning of this conversation, where when you started out being a musician, you had this thing that it wasn't going to be good enough if it wasn't some kind of genius
Yeah.
innovation. do we essentially have the wrong idea about creativity as a society? Because I feel that a lot of the time that's what people think it is. It's like, I'm not a genius. I don't have a massive skill set. I'm not a Messi. I'm not an Einstein. So I can't possibly be creative.
I completely agree. And in fact, something that I've reflected on many times in recent years is that I was actually inhibited by my own insistence on being brilliant, because what that did, it restricted me from experimentation. I thought I had to execute something that was so profound and so brilliant. That stopped me from, number one, learning other people's music, which I was like, I don't want to learn other people's music. Well, that helps you to develop your skill and your knowledge. Number two, if you come up with something and it's not that brilliant, you discard it rather than just adding it to your repertoire of things. So it did restrict me, I feel. And yeah, there are two ways creativity scientists tend to think about creativity. You have big C creativity or little c
Yeah.
creativity. Big C being the Einsteins of this world. But little c creativity, so many people are in fact very creative on a daily basis. A brilliant new way to trick your toddler into bed might
Right.
be more creative than some great artist executing some phenomenal new painting that gets all the plaudits.
Right.
That creativity is absolutely accessible to all. It's not about those genius big ideas. It really is about, as you say, those kind of little everyday things that could profoundly creative. If they overturn an assumption, let's say, or if
Yeah.
they are counterintuitive in some way, which is another thing that I like
Yeah.
to talk about.
I wonder if it's not actually so everyday that we take it for granted and we go, "Oh, I'm not creative," but we solve these problems like you. I mean, that was a great example all the time, and maybe that's why we got the wrong idea about this.
Yeah, I think in a sense we deify those people who are creative icons, and that's inspirational, but at the same time it can make us feel inadequate
Mhm.
and feel like it's not for us. And of course, but working in the field as you have many times, I've met people who say, "Oh, I'm not creative. I'm not really good." I talked to a writer, a professional writer, a couple of years ago, with a view to potentially coaching him. And he's a published author. He's really really good. He's written screenplays. He's written a couple of novels. And I started talking to him about how he sees himself. And I mentioned the word genius. And his first response to me was, "Oh no 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 no! Nothing to do with genius. I'm not a genius. I'm just a guy." And for whatever reason, whether that's right or wrong, he had this sense that there are geniuses up here and there's just little old me down here. Now, can it be used in a sense? In a sense, it's nice to be realistic. You don't see yourself as some kind of ego-inflated,
Yeah.
person, megalomaniac. But on the other hand, a lot of people do feel there's that kind of separation that we don't have access to to that power. And yet, I think work in the field as you do as well. Sometimes you can see a person in a workshop come up with an idea. You think that idea is so brilliant.
Yeah.
It's incredible. You're just a person. You just came up with it just like that. It's so incredible. If that would be to be developed, that could win an Oscar, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it
Exactly.
really is there. But there's a difference, of course, between what's simple and what's easy. Sometimes creativity can be
Oh.
incredibly simple, but it's not easy because of the biases, the cognitive biases that we have, the way that knowledge can tend to inhibit our, creative thinking, all sorts of social pressures. I mean, that's another big part of it, which is that
Yeah.
you can say till you're blue in the face, "Oh, we're having a brainstorming session now, so anything goes." But people are fearful of ridicule. They
Right.
are. They
Right.
don't feel as free as they'd like to feel. And all sorts of other, so I mean, from draconian sort of social pressures, in a very conservative society, let's say, to just the more general sense of not wanting to be foolish. And that's
Oh.
something which
Same. Yeah.
can really liberate you. I mean, there's a lovely TED talk by Ethan Hawke. I don't know if you've seen it. It's a 12-minute TED talk by Ethan Hawke, and he talks about the creative process, and he references Allen Ginsberg as the poet, and he says, Ginsberg argued that his role is to be the fool, is to be ridiculed. You can't be you can't be inhibited by a sense of fear. We all have it. So that's the problem. So it's about trying to find a way to unlock that in order to free yourself ultimately. Yeah, it's
Yeah. Nice. All right. So, three concrete steps
mm.
for someone who thinks, okay, I hear you, Michael, and you're a doctor, so I believe you. What should I do?
The first thing to say is that creativity can be practiced.
Right.
In fact, there's a lot of research showing, scientific research showing that taking a short course in creativity principles, organized by, some scientists, does have a measurable effect on people's ability to solve creativity challenges. So it is a muscle, it is something that's inaccessible magic. It's something that if you learn some of the principles for creativity and you start to apply those principles, you can and do improve your ability to think in a creative way. Um, Other things that are very useful, I would say, for creativity is something like walking. There's a lot of research that shows that when you move your body while thinking about something, while thinking about a challenge of some kind, if you move your body, you are more likely to solve the problem than if you just sit there doing nothing. So that kind of movement tends to put us into a different sort of frame of mind. It's a common thing we find, people have a great idea when they're in the shower. It's because they're actually doing a ritualistic thing where they're taking they're not necessarily thinking consciously about the problem at that particular moment, but undergoing some kind of normal physical process. It frees up your mind. If you're going to sit there with a pen in hand, staring at a blank sheet of paper, trying, what this does, it increases beta waves in the brain. So these kind of fast waves in the brain tend not to be associated so much with creative thinking. That tends to come from alpha waves or even slower theta waves in the brain. So when you're more relaxed, when you're more, doing in a kind of a more chilled space, you're much more likely, and the science shows this, to think creatively. If you're stressed, if you're very concentrated, if you're working all the time, that doesn't tend to be when the most creative ideas come.
Right.
So yeah, practice, move your body, and relax. These are the three ways I would say. And of course, there's millions of other things to say, but those are very basic to the way that we are on a daily basis. I mean, if you think about somebody who's a creative professional, they might go to an office, have meetings, try to produce work, and it's very concentrated work and it's very sort of task orientated, where in fact they're more likely to come up with their best idea on the way home as
Yeah.
they're walking home to the tube or in the shower that night, right? So, um, yeah,
Yeah. But again, that's one of those paradoxes because without all of that structure
yeah,
and all of that work, laying
that's
those
right.
foundations, do the
That's right.
realizations come?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
Unpredictable.
yeah, it is. It is.
All right. Good. Michael, it's been great chatting to you. We haven't even got to your cards
Oh,
and your system. So give us the elevator pitch quickly. What's it all about?
so essentially, my 25 years working in creativity, I've tried to boil down what are the key principles of creativity? What are the rules of combination of transformation of any idea to change it from one form to another? What are the principles involved in the creative process? For example, as I mentioned, moving your body, that's one principle I call physicality. There's collaborating with others. So working with others is another principle of creativity. Then there are the types of initial idea that you can come up with. So, how do you come up with an idea in the first place? Well, sometimes you sit down and you try to come up with an idea and you come up with an idea. Fine. That's one type of initial idea. I call that a proto, which is a sort of a certain kind of idea seed. But there are loads of other ways. If you look at how ideas emerge throughout history, sometimes somebody notices something. If you notice something and you're going about your normal day and you happen to notice something, you weren't sitting down trying to come up with an idea.
Yeah.
This is what I call a captor, which is and in fact it's represented. If you can see this card here, that's a card representing an eye, because you just see something and you go, oh, that's interesting. And this is how Velcro was invented, by the way.
Yeah.
George de Mistral, he just noticed these birds sticking to his dog's fur, and he thought, oh, that's interesting. He looked at them under the microscope and they're like, oh, look, these little hooky things, and I could make something out of that. He didn't sit down to say, I'm going to design a fastening system. No, he just
Right.
noticed something. So there are these, for me, there are 9 ways you can come up with an initial idea,
Wow.
which I put into the cards. Yes. Now, how you cut the cake of this is yeah, for debate, but for me, 9 ways is a really good way of understanding these different kinds of ways. Then there are the principles of combination and transformation, and then there are the personality types as well.
Yeah.
You can embody these. So the three basic principles that you need, the three things that you need expertise, you need openness, and you need oddness. And these are represented in the sage, the explorer, and the trickster. So, for example, this is the sage card. This is the
Okay.
sage, and then you have the explorer card. And then this is the trickster card. So I'm sure you and I we're quite tricksterish in our own way. So essentially, I've got these cards, and now they're a set of 90 cards, like tarot cards. And it's like an operating manual for your creative brain. That's the idea. And it comes with where is it? I've got it here somewhere. Put it here somewhere. It comes with a manual, which is how to use it. Because if you just get a set of cards, what are you going to do? So there's a manual here, which is like got hundreds and hundreds of pages on how to use it, and essentially it gives you a huge number of exercises in how to practice, train your creativity. It could just be ritualizing your creativity, making things feel like it's a normal part woven into your everyday
Right.
life, or it could be generating a new idea. And in that case, you put together two or three cards with endless combinations that will just make you come up with some kind of strange little invention. There are all sorts of ways of encouraging those parts of your brain and yourself to emerge through this. So for me, it's interesting. There's a movement called friction maxing. I don't know if you've heard of this thing lately. It's a movement against the digital trend in society to make everything easier.
Right.
Everything is easier. Everything's a touch of a button on an app. Well, a lot of
Yeah.
people are now saying, shouldn't we go back to an analog way of existing, which is like make things a little harder, make things kind of, have more friction in our existence. So for me, having these cards is like a nice way of physicalizing and putting into a kind of more traditional, even ancient form, something which is very mental. We tend to think, of
Yeah.
course, creativity it's all in the head.
All in the head.
Well, this is a way of visualizing things and using kind of Jungian symbolism as well to
Yeah.
activate those parts of
Wow.
ourselves which are quite deep, ancient, but at the same time, this is not some kind of religious practice. This is a creative practice. So it's all about using that symbolism and that ritual to help people to generate new ideas, crazy ideas,
Wow.
tricksterish ideas. Yeah.
Okay.
So that
Well, I'm
this is
sold. I'm ordering a set now.
oh great.
As soon as we finish this.
I mean, essentially, I only thought of embodying all of the work that I'd done in a set of cards a couple of years ago, and I now realize that I've been working on the cards effectively for 30 years without
Yeah.
realizing it,
Right.
and now it's like this is it. This is in my mind. This is creativity. Now, what you do with it is up to you.
Brilliant.
Yeah, so
Michael,
that's
thanks
where I'm
again.
at in my life. Yeah,
Cool. It's been really cool chatting to you, and I'm going to share all the links in the show notes for
thank
your
you, David.
site and for the cards and where people can
Amazing.
order them and also know more about your work.
Thank you.
Thanks for your time.
Thanks, David.
All right. And for you listening, don't forget to rebel against your programming. No, rebel against your preconceptions, rebel against the status quo, reject your programming so that you can create more interesting stuff. But come back next time for another episode with another extremely interesting creative person. Until next time, don't forget to be more creative.